There's our notification. You probably got it right.
Notification.
Yeah, that we're being live streamed. It says we're live. This is always that weird spot.
Oh, yeah, I
where
see
it's, yeah, live on one screen, and there it goes. Awesome. Excellent. All right, we're good to go. Happy Christmas Monday. Is there a day? Is there a name for the Monday before Christmas?
I think that there is.
I'm going to Google that while you're talking. I need somebody like Joe Rogan has that can just Google all that for me in the moment.
Can you get the can you fact that check?
Relay it into my fact check me. I'll figure out what that's called. If not, we'll call it like Yule Monday or something. That's probably the Monday after Christmas. It's good to be here on Parents Helping Parents Live. Last live stream didn't happen. Unfortunately, some technical issues, but here we are. We're back this week with a fabulous guest that I'm going to turn this over to here in just a moment. So if you're not familiar with Parents Helping Parents, thank you for joining us. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization based here in Oklahoma City, and we have got a pretty simple mission to offer education, support, and shared experiences to parents who have a child any age who are struggling with a substance use disorder. So the main way that we do that is through support groups that we host all across Oklahoma, Edmond, Norman, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, online chapter, those type things. But we do lots of other things. So what I would encourage you to do is do a couple of things. Go to our website, parentshelpingparents.info. For more information, find out about our chapters, find out about all the wonderful things that we're doing, an upcoming caregivers conference in February, for example. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, or if somebody has shared this and you're watching it on somebody else's Facebook page, follow us on social media, on Facebook at Parents Helping Parents Inc. And that's where you can kind of stay up to date and get all of the wonderful information about things that are upcoming. So as an organization, we don't have any professional experience or expertise. We've only kind of walked in the shoes of a loved one and a parent. And so our mission is limited to those things. So none of the outreach that we do is ever considered professional counseling, legal advice, medical advice. All of those things are wonderful. We want you to get those things if they're appropriate for your need, and we want to help you get those things. We want to be able to connect you to those resources, but we just don't ever want to front that that's what we do as an organization. All we do is offer support peer-to-peer. So some of the people that we have on the live stream and speak at our chapters absolutely have that expertise, like our guest tonight, but our organization does not. So, man, what else? Feel like I'm probably missing some things, but that's okay. I'll catch it on the back end. So tonight we have what's both a good friend of mine, also a very talented and wise clinician here in the Oklahoma City area, Mason Phillips. So I'm going to let him do his thing, talk to us a little bit and conversate with us about stress and holiday care and all of those wonderful things. And then me and him will have some banter and Q&A time kind of at the end. So Mason, man, thanks for joining us. Make sure we kind of got busy shooting the bull before. Make sure you take an opportunity at some point, talk about your organization, talk about how people can get in touch with you here locally and get referrals and all that good stuff. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess I'll just get that out of the way right now, because I'm not going to remember at the end that I'm the clinical director for the counseling arm of Ministries of Jesus, which is actually called Transformation Christian Counseling. I became the director there back in August. Ministries of Jesus is a very unique and cool organization. It gives back to the community in a really great way. We offer medical, dental, vision, and counseling and recovery services. It is a Christian organization, but it's not something that we're gonna beat you over the head with walking in the door, because you probably have medical needs or counseling needs. I know that the medical clinic, if somebody is needing, it does not qualify for Medicaid or anything like that, they can call on Monday mornings at 9 a.m. and start the process of becoming established there as a patient. But as far as counseling, if you go to moj.com/counseling, you can make an inquiry there. We have several really, really great counselors. All of them love Jesus unapologetically, and me included. I'm there. I've got a great team of people. I also have a private practice that I run right there. So if it's not something that you can get on the wait list and you need to get in a little bit quicker, we all also have private practices. So I run my private practice right there, and I see a variety of different people, a lot of couples in recovery, a lot of individuals trying to maintain long-term recovery from lots of addictions, alcohol, drug and alcohol included, but not limited to that. So I know that right now, especially, is a really, I think right now is always a really awkward time of the year for people because, so part of what makes me, what I think is really cool, but what is probably kind of weird as far as the therapist community is concerned, is that I'm a marriage and family therapist. And so what I kind of see is I see families going back to how they behaved as a system before everybody kind of grew up and moved away. And so sometimes what can happen when people are back together is we can kind of fall back into the systemic habits and balances that were in place before, which is really, really normal. But there's a lot of issues with that, especially for families who are struggling with, either active addiction being in the family in some way, or even just recovery. I mean, the recovery from drugs and alcohol in general is just so hard, and it takes such a toll on the family emotionally that everybody really recovers. I've always believed that. I've been on here on the stream show, I don't know what you call it, this group before, and said that this is a family thing and the family has to recover together. And so sometimes family members haven't gotten to do that recovery, and so they're holding on to a lot of resentments. And so what I see happening is that all the way leading up to whatever the holiday is, just a month ago it was Thanksgiving and people were experiencing the same thing, and now it's going to happen again. And I think that's part of the issue too, is it's this repetitive thing. Like, I just saw all these people at Thanksgiving and it sucked, and now I'm going to see everybody at Christmas and it's going to suck, So if we have that mindset, and by the way, maybe it doesn't suck, maybe everybody's just a little nervous, and that's okay too. I think this, I think that this has turned into a cultural trope that people have, they dread the holidays because they see their families. I don't think it's that bad. I do think that people do get nervous, especially as adult children become adults and form new ways of thinking in general. And that may include recovery for themselves, because not all family members go through the recovery process. And so that those resentments, like I said, get held on to. But more than that, it's that families are really good at returning to a familiar homeostasis that they had earlier on in their life. And all that means, I say homeostasis, but all that means is whatever the rules were, however it is that everybody interacted. So, I'm trying to think of what an example of this would be. So if it's like, nobody talks about, the family rule is that nobody talks about how controlling mom is. We just let her be controlling and kind of we let it go. We can all kind of handle it. We all have our way that we handle it, but we don't, just whatever we do, we don't talk about it. And instead, when mom tries to control son or child, adult child, now adult child's gonna move toward dad, for instance. And now we've triangulated, and we've created a triangle of relationships. And so now I'm gonna enmesh myself with dad, maybe have an unhealthy, and that can happen all kinds of ways. It's like, maybe families are really familiar with this thing that happens where kids come home for Christmas, and then just as soon as dad goes out the back door to poke the ham in the smoker or something like that, mom is going to turn to her adult child and go, I cannot get you. Your dad is just making me crazy. And what could be more inappropriate than a parent complaining about their marriage to their child? But sometimes that happens when we're adult children. Our parents try to enmesh themselves with the adult child, in a way to form a connection, but it's also part of the pattern. So now the adult child's got this weird information. It causes a lot of stress. And I think all that it is, and I really want to, I want to simplify this, and I'm not going to talk for a whole long time, because I think that this is really, really simple. I think what happens is leading up to whatever family gathering, especially the holidays, because there's going to be so many people all together, we're already telling ourselves a story about what the holidays are going to be, about what it's going to be like, so whatever the circumstance is, and I'm just going to take that, recovering addict per se, and I'm going to say that's a person who's in recovery, who I'm going to do it both ways. I'm going to walk this out. This is a person who's in active recovery. It doesn't matter where they are along that process. Trust issues run really, really deep. So let's take that for instance. A story is already being told. Everybody's telling themselves a story about, I'm going to be victimized at this family gathering. I'm going to end up the victim. And so you have to think about, what does it mean when the members of a family are preemptively telling the same story about their own selves? If everyone is telling the same story, I'm going to be the victim at Christmas. What dynamic does that create? It's going to create a really stressful dynamic when everyone in the room feels like they are the victim in a situation. So, I could tell that same story with the person who's not exhibiting active recovery. Maybe they are active with their addiction. By the way, that's something that's true in my family. There may be somebody who we're not quite sure if they're really on top of their recovery. And while that is concerning, it is Christmas, and unless they make it my business, it's not my business. So instead of going into it saying, oh man, if they're not working their recovery, then I'm going to end up a victim. And they may actually be telling the same version of that story. They may be saying, man, I'm going to go, and I'm not, my recovery is not perfect, and I don't want to tell them that, and they're going to badger me about it, and I'm going to be the victim. Everybody's going into it telling the same story, that they are the victim. And we have to, what I would recommend 2 just mental exercises to help kind of get you thinking in new ways, because that is the way, at the end of the day, thinking in new ways about the whole situation is going to help you have a better time with your family. Because if no one's going to think in new ways, at least you can think in a new way. That is going to rattle it a little bit for you. So 2 ways to do that. One, and I learned these and I've applied them just recently, and it's been a marvelous tool. One way to do this is, because we become very, very committed to the explanations we already have about people in our family. Mom is going to complain to me about, mom's enmeshed with me about, we already have an explanation about that. And here's what's true. When we have a story that we're telling ourselves, it is very, very hard for a person to become uncommitted to that version of that story, or become uncommitted to an explanation we already have about something. If we have an explanation in my head about how Christmas is going to go, how our family is going to act together, and why they're acting that way, it's very hard to get ourselves away from that explanation. So one exercise that you can try is right away, and you could do, maybe you got to do this with like your spouse, or a partner, or even just with yourself, but being able to say, what are 5 other explanations for what could be going on right now? Because we have the one explanation. What are, and just make it easier. What are 3 to 5 other explanations? And what you'll find is by the 3rd explanation, and you have to actually do it. I did this with a family recently. And I said, because this person was complaining, they weren't, that this family member wasn't responding to any text messages. And they were like, I just don't get what I just don't understand why they would do that. They obviously are mad. And I was like, that is the story you're telling yourself. That's your current explanation. What are 3 to 5 other explanations for why they're not texting you? And this person, because they weren't in the right mindset for it, they were like, I don't know. Her phone got broke. She lost it in a jungle. And I was like, okay, don't answer like a child. Answer like you want to understand this person, So it's like, maybe the amount of text messages she's getting is so overwhelming that she has bottlenecked and shut down emotionally that she doesn't even know what to say, because she doesn't know which message to respond to anymore. I mean, that can be really overwhelming for a person. Maybe she's just gotten to where maybe she's getting so many text messages from so many people that she's in shutdown mode. When you start to do that exercise, what occurs to you is that there are a vast variety of explanations for what's going on. Could it be true that your first explanation is true? Absolutely. But it's not an exercise that gives them the benefit of the doubt. What it does is it teaches you to have a more generous interpretation so that you have a little bit more hope and you have the ability to think in other ways. And if you can do that, then you can enter into any family situation with a lot more of an open mind. Another way to do this would be, so we keep calling it a story. One way to do this is to retell the story with every character and play it out with every character as the victim, the hero, and the villain. Okay, you've got yourself set up as the victim. What does that mean about them? Are they the villain? So go ahead and tell that story. Tell this story like they're the villain. Okay, but once you tell that story, now tell that story like they're the victim. Then tell that story like they're the hero. Then tell that story like you're the victim. Then tell that story like you're the villain. Then tell that story like you're the hero, and watch how the story changes every time you tell it in different roles. Because that's the thing about families, is once they've established roles, we are very good at fulfilling them. I remember a long time ago, I had a family that I was working with. It was actually a couple. I really was working with the whole family, but when they showed up, the big issue was that his teenage daughter, was becoming really, really rebellious, and there's some drugs that she was kind of getting curious with. And this was he was on his second partner. And so her mom was from his previous relationship. And I think I said that right. So she was living with her stepmom and her dad. And she started to get really, really rebellious. And he was really trying to firm up his role as the disciplinarian and really trying to strengthen his way through it. And, I really tried to help him focus on the relationship, but it was just so intimidating for him that he buckled down, doubled down more and more and more. And she just got so rebellious, and rules minus relationship is rebellion. She bounced. She went and found mom, who was not a good person to be living with. And it didn't matter. She was moving out. And so one thing I warned him about it, because he had 2 other kids in the home. And one thing I warned him about it is I said, you really need to strengthen your relationship with these kids now, and point out that there's been conflict, and you understand that you have a role in that conflict, and you want to be intentional about your relationship. You need to make sure and do that. Oh no, we don't need to do that. I have a great relationship with both of them. They're not any problem. And I said, okay, well, if you're not careful, clock is ticking. One of these kids is going to start showing those symptoms. No, they would never do that. They're terrific kids. I get a call about a month later, and the youngest boy has stolen a cell phone from a gas station, is starting to smoke pot. I think he was probably already smoking it a long time, but he's starting to get busted with it, and he starts to get real rebellious, really openly rebellious. And he gets so frustrated that he says, I'm out of here. I'm going to go live with my older brother down the road, because he had an adult brother who was living somewhere else. I'm out of here. And it happened again. So, I warned him again. I said, listen, you need to be really careful. You got one kid left. And if he decides to take on that role, this is the thing about families, is that when we have an assigned role that we've lived in for so long, we are very good at fulfilling it. It's like being the principal player in a Broadway musical. You learn those lines and it's in your bones. So if you're the golden child, when you show up at the family gathering, you better have the main course dish prepared, and all your kids better be on their best behavior, because your role is to be the golden child, and you ought to be perfect. And if you're not, you have failed in your role. And so everybody loves to fall into their role. If you've got an addict in your family, we need to be really, really cautious not to, as a family, mistakenly reinforce them into that role. Not saying that that is our fault. Never are symptoms of addiction our fault. But when that is the role in the family, we do have some unconscious and subconscious ways that we like to reinforce that, because it's something that we're comfortable with. It's the explanation that we already understand. It's very hard to uncommit ourselves to explanation. So those are just two ways that I would suggest kind of easing your mind and thinking new ways, because when you focus on the stress that you're going to experience with your family for the holidays, then that is what you will experience. So when you put in your mind, oh man, it's going to be really stressful, then you've just taught yourself exactly how to play it out. You know what it will be like to be stressed during the holidays. You know how that tape plays. So play it through and be done with it. And then ask yourself, okay, so what would the holidays look like if we were silly? What if we were all really silly with each other? I wonder how that would go. And just sit back and think about, I wonder how that would go. What if I was really silly? What if we were all just kind of silly with each other? What if we were, what if we got all together? What if we were really affectionate? Now, this is like the time where if I'm sitting with a family, they laugh and scoff at me. And that is terrific. If you're watching this and you're like, my family affectionate, then you are tremendously committed to the explanation you already have of your family. But if you can start to internally practice, maybe we could all be really affectionate with each other. Maybe we could all be really honoring of each other. Maybe we could all be really silly and funny with each other. Then you're thinking in new ways. Then you're considering other explanations for how your family could be. But if you don't, you're just going to fall right back into the roles that you always fall into. And this is the one thing that perpetuates lots of addictive behaviors in families. So I don't know. I hope this is really helpful. This is kind of like the spiel that I've got for family systems, Derek. So I'm curious if you've got questions or if others got questions. You're on mute, brother. You did it. You did the thing.
Man,
it's okay.
Amazing that I've done this.
Zoom, and I've done it like 100 times, and I'm like, we've got 2 years of practice.
It's not, and I still do it. I'm on mute. You're on mute.
Alt-A.
I'll tell you what this means. It means that humans were never really designed to interact this way.
No, yeah, that's true.
That's what it means right there. Write it down. You heard it here first. This is how Terminator started. So I was making some notes as you were writing, because I love that you were talking about stories and narratives, because I think people and like the human condition is just built for narrative. It's why we love movies and theater and even songs and poetry and all of these things, is because like we're just geared toward having this narrative. And I think that the story that we tell ourselves and our own personal narratives are really powerful. And I love that you mentioned that.
Yeah, Brene Brown this, but she's not the first one to say this, that narrative is so powerful. Actually, one of the first ones to say it is Michael White. He's not as sexy as Brene Brown, but Michael White was a tremendous narrative therapist. And what he would say is, because we think in narrative, when you are missing part of the narrative, subconsciously you're going to fill it in. That's why we say things like, oh, well, I know what they're doing. This is what they must be doing because I know them so well.
Yeah.
And we complete the narrative, and we're probably wrong. We could be wrong. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, I think conceptually it goes back even before therapy, you know.
For sure.
I mean, like one of my favorite kind of quips from Stoic philosophy is a reminder for people not to suffer imagined troubles.
Yeah.
You know, that we're telling, you know, like you were mentioning, we're telling ourselves a story that Christmas is going to be terrible. I'm going to be a victim, and we're experiencing all this suffering and all this trouble, and it's all imagined.
Yeah.
Like none of it is real yet. It's all in our head. And I was reminded of a quote from a friend of mine, Anthony. I was listening to him speak last week or a couple weeks ago, where he said, I've experienced lots of terrible things in my life, and some of them actually happened to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. He said the same thing to me. Yeah. He said
yeah,
that to me.
yeah, it's great. But I love, and you know, I was even reading a book recently about reducing secondary trauma. It's a book for therapists, and one of the first things that they reminded everybody is, man, if you don't like your job, start telling yourself a different story about your job. You know, if you're unhappy with your relationships, start telling yourself a different story about your relationships, and watch those things change. And so I made a note to ask this, and I think you gave a couple already, but I was going to ask you if you had any other ones loaded up. I'm often in session talking with clients about this, and the first question I ask is, sounds wonderful. How do I do that?
Yeah.
How do I change my story? And I know you mentioned like, hey, start retelling it in different ways as practice, but were there any other things that you like to share with people that you're working with or with families that are like, hey, here's some just practical ways to begin to tell yourself a different narrative, to begin to change your story and provide some real traction?
Yeah. One of the big ones is the circle of control. I mean, one thing that comes up a lot around this time, you know what I think is really funny is that, do you know how many people come in my office and they say, I'm such a people pleaser? I'm sure you hear this a lot, you
All the
know.
time.
Oh yeah, it's because I'm such a people pleaser. And my guess is that if we were to interrogate the people in their lives, I don't know why I said interrogate, maybe interview would be gentler. If we were to
I like
interview,
interrogate. Sometimes we
if
got to
we
get
were to
hardcore with people.
if we were to interrogate the people in their lives, the people in their lives might say they are a total drag. They might. I mean, they might say, yeah, they're a real people pleaser. They will just like anything. They're a real fawner. They do everything you say. But here's the thing. There's a lot of I just used the word fawn, and that just opens up like a lot of components that we need to look at. But at its core, people pleasing is an attempt to control somebody else. Because if you are doing something that's submitting to somebody else, I'm just going to submit to them. What are you saying? This will make them happy. And when you do that, your initial concern is making sure that you're on top of their emotions. And who wants to do that? That is outside of your circle of control. So if you really want to get down to brass tacks on this, you gotta get your legal pad out, draw a circle, and inside goes what you control, outside goes what you don't control. And you can boil that down to two things: others, myself. Right? So if you're gonna go into the holidays and start people pleasing, just shut it down. Because if you haven't learned it by now, you can't please these people. It can't be done. They will either be pleased or not pleased. I use the word fawn, and I think that's really important, especially when we're talking about with the families with addiction, because that usually means that there's some trauma involved, a lot of trauma involved, either event-based trauma or complex systematic trauma that's occurred over a period of time. And that in particular can be really sensitive to, we've heard a lot about like fight or flight and what we're starting and freeze. And what we're starting to talk a lot about now is fawning, which is this behavior that people go into when it's a people pleasing behavior and it's a trauma. It's one reason this is actually true in I this comes from Goldman, the emotional intelligence guy. He was talking about his work with military and how some of the military training that has to happen nowadays is that military officers actually have to have a lot of training on utilizing their firearm when they're under tremendous pressure. Because you'd think they would just like get under pressure and just like fire, 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 fire. But actually, what tends to happen is because of the intense pressure and because of the intense fear, if it's enough, they tend to kind of like submit and like, okay, I'm gonna lay down. But they have to be trained to utilize their firearm in those situations. Now, that doesn't translate great to families, but it is a trauma response that when we go into a great deal of fear, we tend to just like, okay, whatever you want, whatever you like. I'm just going to submit to that. Whatever you want, whatever you like. I see this a lot in the so this might be a familiar dynamic to some people for the holidays. It's a pretty familiar dynamic to the mother-son spouse relationship. So the new spouse, or even a seasoned spouse that's been there in the family for a while, and she may be super familiar with this behavior between mother and son, where mom is going to feel pretty protective toward, or son is going to be pretty protective towards mom, and it's going to be harder to stand by his new spouse and the criticisms that she faces with her mother-in-law. And so son may feel, or husband may feel pretty defensive of mom's antics, and kind of, oh, just, it's not, you gotta kind of like, just gotta like let that go. And that's a fawning behavior. And it's a response to trauma. We don't talk about that a lot. So if you're a people pleaser, understand that that's partially a trauma response. I also understand that if it is a trauma response, it's an attempt to control your environment.
Yeah.
And you can only control yourself. So draw your circle of control and understand what's inside and what's outside.
Yeah. Miller is the guy that wrote and you should pick it up, Mason. It's called Reducing Secondary Traumatic Stress, Strategies for Lengthening Your Career as a Trauma Therapist, or something like that. But as I was reading it, he really has 5 principles that he wants therapists to be really good at utilizing. But as I was reading it, I was like, man, like every one of my clients also needs to be doing these 5 principles, because we're all experiencing all different kinds of secondary stress from jobs and family and everything else. But when he talks about narrative, what he talks about is it starts with just having a conscious narrative, just being aware of the story that we're telling ourselves as a first step. And you were talking about training military, to use their firearms under stress. I can't imagine anybody ever not practicing a skill until they had to use it. Like, imagine a basketball player that never practiced free throws until the big game was on the line, and he got fouled and had to hit him. It would be a nightmare. And so I like to remind all my clients, like, hey man, practice these skills not in November, the week before you're going to see your family. Like, practice them in June while you're on vacation, and practice them in other places so that we get that set going.
I was watching a Sports Center clip of a high schooler. I think he's like, he's probably going to go straight to the NBA, but I mean, he was practicing. He didn't have a ball in his hands. He was practicing these, these jump shots and layups, and they had him blindfolded, and he would jump into the air and they'd push him from different angles. And part of what they were doing is they were training what happens, because I mean, it's great to go on the basketball court and practice a few layups and dunk a few things, but what you forget is that there are other 200-pound men slamming into you when you go up there, because they're trying to get you to stop. And so when you go up in the air and somebody slams into you, you're just not used to that. And so it's getting them acclimated to that unexpected.
Yeah.
No doubt unexpected things are going to happen when you go for Christmas. I mean, but maybe not. I mean, you may go, eat the food, open the presents, wear the pajamas, and move on with your lives. But there may be some unexpected things that happen. Decide for yourself if you have any control over that.
Yeah.
I mean, this will give you the most freedom in the world. And when you release that, when you go, not my house, not my problem, then you can really create some distance. And what that does is it leaves the people who are in control of that not isolated necessarily, but isolated enough emotionally to be able to say, "Oh, this is really for me to handle. Nobody else is going to handle this for me. This is what families really need, is to be able to kind of sort out where the problem's sitting."
Yep. Excellent, man. Man, Mason, thank you so much. Just so and people know that might be watching this after the fact or on YouTube, I put Ministry of Jesus' counseling website link in the comment section, and then I put your private practice Facebook page in the comment section. So if people had questions or wanted to reach out and get in touch with you, they could. So
what about Monday? Did we learn with that?
Yeah, so there's a term for the week before Christmas, but not specifically the Monday. So we can just make something up and roll with that. How old are your children?
6 and 4.
Ask your 6-year-old and your 4-year-old, let them coin the phrase, and
Oh.
that's what we'll start rolling with. Yeah, excellent. Hey, Mason, man, thanks for your time tonight. You could be doing 1,000 different things.
My pleasure.
It's always a joy. Parents always love hearing from you. I always enjoy spending time with you, brother. And for people that are watching, thank you so much. We'll be back in the new year. Hey, make sure you're keeping track on Facebook and on the website of what's happening, because we really have some really cool topics coming up in January and February. Families that are coming on to tell their story, people in recovery coming on to tell their story, people that are going to be talking about medication-assisted treatment and insurance-related issues, and lots of things that I think get skipped over in our field. So be ready for a great first quarter from Parents Helping Parents Live. And I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season, a wonderful Christmas, and a really happy New Year, especially you and your family, Mason.
Thanks. Merry Christmas, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.